Oh, is that your profession?
To which I really agree. I think that's.
No, I think it makes sense too.
And the rest of it you can take and leave. I mean.
Well, I guess that was my question is that we got these comments.
I think we have to forge a consensus, right?
Yes, I think
and
we
some
might
of
have
them,
to vote point by point and decide if we
I did get them off of explicitly saying we ought to declare that housing is not a crisis.
We're being recorded.
Said,
really, they want to say that.
well, they have said. Leanne has said that.
She
Oh,
said that, yeah. Good. My colleagues and put them in there, but some of them are similar to some of your colleagues' points.
Right.
So I think we could build consensus. There's just one about limiting commercial development that might be a challenge, but some of the others, I think actually were not that.
Yeah.
Right.
They were pretty
thank you.
reasonable. And so I think we can come up with it. My challenge is I'm going to DC on Sunday for the League of Cities. And so I can try to work on it there, but I'm a little kind of questionable. So I just need help, I guess, in reorganizing this because, I think it.
Is there anybody, is there any professional in your city that does housing that might?
I asked my city manager if he'd take a stab at it, and he was willing to.
Is he a good writer?
He's pretty good.
All right.
Like how detailed, how many pages are we at now?
It's not that long. It's only 3, 4. But again, there's a lot of duplication too.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so,
I think if it consolidates down to 2 or
I'll check in with Dan.
2 pages is probably the maximum we want to end up with in the end.
Yeah.
So do you think that your city manager can take this next cut at it and then be at the meeting to be able to explain and defend the changes that have been made?
I think I will probably have to take on that role.
Are you going to be back for the board
I'll be
meeting?
back on
okay.
I'll be back
I'm
Wednesday
sorry.
night. Yes.
Okay.
No, that's fine.
If someone
It's better
could
that way.
help Craft it.
Yeah.
I'll call Dan and
defend it.
okay, well.
And I think what we should
If you
do,
want any help from me, I mean, I can write decently too, but given my, I'll call it a bit tenuous position with my fellow council members, I'm happy to have.
Well, we can present. We can have that document available.
If you want me to edit, or something, I could do that.
My thought was we could craft the next draft, but include the comments as an attachment. So
yes, I think that would be.
Questions. Well, where was my comment? It could be there.
I think that would be I think that would be respectful, right? Here's the comments from Cupertino. Everybody can see them, right? But here's our best.
We have to vote almost point by point because if everyone's goals are put in here, we're going to end up with a thesis.
So
it can't be. It's got to be more of a consensus.
I don't know how much time we have today, but could we take a stab at the concepts and to a first run on what we
as opposed to trying to rewrite it.
Include, and then anything that we don't include,
with paper copy of it.
Right. Sure.
Next Thursday we can, vote on whether to add anything else in here.
Right.
Okay, so we do have it up here as well.
And so the first suggested change was in the we support the calls for action to the first bullet. The 55% threshold, there was question of, I think it was originally about investments in housing, so.
I'm going to switch to
Oh yeah, so
we just added revenue generating
versus clean.
Yeah. Instead of these.
It was too vague. Yeah. Like so they just asked me what does that mean?
Yeah, I think that was my comment. It's like, okay, well we probably can assume it's initiatives, but
okay.
So I just said revenue generating ballot measures for investments in affordable housing.
Okay, I like that.
Whether it's state level or local level.
Well, based on the shoot bill, it sounds like this enterprise will be creating all these initiatives for the 9 Bay Area County.
So they'll put up the ballot measures?
That's what his bill is specifically about, so.
And-
Red lines.
And the revenue measures to pass would be 55. The bar to pass currently is 55.
No, it's 67 because
Right.
it's a special, tax or
Okay.
But they're
housing.
asking for it
So
to.
they wanna lower it
We wanna make
To
it
the
more
bond
general.
measure level at 55%. Oh, yeah, there was a cleaner copy.
No, we put it up there because we wanted to see as we were, what was,
okay.
Yeah.
What's easier?
would you rather see the cleaner copy?
I mean, I have it here, so that's fine, yeah.
It's nice to see what's removed.
I just worry the 55% threshold's too detailed. Like, I like the revenue generate.
Mhm.
It sounded last meeting that there was at least consensus of new funding we would support. We just didn't want them to take our money.
Right. Well, I'm thinking we just, I appreciate the suggestion to reorganize and then just title certain, and we can just do funding, new funding sources.
Exactly.
And then put ballot measure, 55%, internet sales tax revenue, governor's ideas. There was if you go down to the next, we support the last sentence. We urge the sources of taxation to be progressive in nature and avoid regressive taxes, as well as unfunded mandates. Came from my colleague. I can, we can wordsmith it and
I think that's good.
make it.
I mean, my council would certainly agree. They're like,
Yes,
we
I
don't.
think that was actually in your council
Yeah.
list. And then the next one's a little hard to read, but we oppose a one-size-fits-all approach to housing densities and land use decision-making. However, we are interested in Governor Newsom's proposal around fiscal incentives and disincentives, which would give cities the ability to comply with state requirements and directives while still meeting the context of their specific local environments. And that was from Eric, the Phil staff.
See, so I like your idea, Margaret, of like one area for funding
Mhm.
where he would say we support the new fiscal incentives, and then having the one size fits all separate.
Okay.
Because it's really about revenue and reforms, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think so too.
That's true. Yeah.
With regard to land use,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a point to be made in the idea that, if you try one size fits all, the problem with it, I mean, why doesn't it work? It's because if you come down with a meat cleaver, right, a very crude instrument, you're going to have projects that simply won't pencil out in a lot of communities. But in other communities or other parts of communities, they may be very lucrative for developers, right? And let them basically entitle them to do amazing things, so to speak, without the ability of the community to recover infrastructure costs. And I think the idea is, there's simply a lot more value, it's hard to do something, right, that doesn't take into account location, if you're going to incent this stuff.
So, are you okay with keeping those comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think for reform, I think I heard that loud and clear, that they want to make sure that opposition to one size fits all is in there. And then again, his second part is maybe if we could do a general thing of like, we support new additional fiscal incentives and revenues.
So my only request there is to talk about why one size fits all isn't a good solution. Elaborate on the point of that in the way I was suggesting.
What would you suggest?
Well,
How to
to say, ground conditions within a city even are different, but certainly from city to city are different. You write a one-size-fits-all bill, it won't enable development in many, many places where we ought to have some, and it will enable development in other places, but in such ways that, you know, developers reap windfalls, and that's not without helping us cover our infrastructure costs. And so, I mean, maybe it's too obvious.
One size fits all doesn't necessarily enable development.
It doesn't enable
The
development.
production of
Mm-hmm.
housing.
You know, one size fits all means you're going to have a lot of projects that won't meet the criterion in many places, and then in some places it
Got it.
may give them a big gift.
Okay.
And if we're doing this all without much CEQA, or without mitigations, or by right, there's no negotiation. I think this idea that we look at ground conditions and we try to negotiate to strike deals is really important. I mean, it's the basis of us getting anything from Apple when they build a spaceship, right? We enter into a development agreement. And we try to get what we can until we think we got a project that will go that both sides want. It's a win-win rather than a win-lose.
Are you editing us? Okay.
Going down to the second page.
And then the one that Eric did, do you want that one split up as well, or did you already do that?
I haven't done it yet.
Okay,
but I will
I'm just
split
making
up.
sure that I'm making notes.
Oh, actually, I did take
to reflect. Okay.
And then the
You're
fiscal.
taking notes to reflect the intent, right? Not the actual language. That's
Yeah.
going to be, okay.
We're going to
Yeah,
wordsmith
we're
all
gonna
this
have to really wordsmith
and
this.
reorganize it, yeah.
All right, good.
On the second page, about Governor Newsom's call for private sector to invest significant contributions. I didn't, it's not in here, I'm
Where were you
sorry,
seeing
but,
this? Oh, at the bottom of the
on
first
the,
page?
oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's on the bottom of our first page.
Okay, good, got it.
My colleague, John McAllister, asked me to include, and build housing, so not just putting money in, but he wants companies to build the housing, which is what, you know,
So-
Google, we've been talking to Google about.
I'm less convinced that, I mean, it's hard to ask companies to actually go do that, right? I mean, I realize they're pressed as a community benefit to do it, but a lot of companies, for them, it's completely out of their domain and they don't.
But they have the land, and that's what's key.
Yeah, no,
You know,
sure,
they can
okay.
go partner with the developer, and which is what Google is, saying they'll do.
Yeah.
But they have the land, and so we need that land from them.
Mhm. Well, okay.
So is that okay to add that?
Can you repeat what John wanted to add?
He just wanted to add, to invest significant contributions into and build housing. That was it. Just add
Where is that?
build. It's not in here. I'm sorry.
No, which paragraph are you
So right
saying?
here, it's still
Oh, I see.
reserved, so
All
right
right.
here, a contribution and build housing, not into.
I think he just wants it
So-
stronger.
Okay.
Well, if it's in a sentence that says Governor Newsom has called for the private sector to invest, has he also asked for companies to actually build it?
No.
So I think
we
you'd
can't
have to,
put it in the
it
same-
can't be, right. You can't misrepresent what he said, right?
Right.
You could make that point otherwise.
I guess we could say, call to private sector to invest significant contributions into housing as well as
But I think the risk here is that,
build.
You don't want to misrepresent that he's somehow.
well, we don't want to misrepresent Newsom, that would be fatal, but
Yeah.
we also don't want to, I mean, my concern is maybe there's Googles of the world that can do this, but there are very few that are going to go develop housing projects realistically, right?
Right.
And so you don't want to sound like we're somehow asking all of our large and small, or large, medium-sized businesses to go create housing for their workers. I mean, it seems a little too out there to me. Whereas every business could contribute investment dollars, right? But it's going to be few that have the sophistication to.
Well, I guess we
Actually
could
build
leave it
housing.
out and significant contributions could be in the form of land dedication. So,
Yeah, of course, right.
We can just
Yeah.
leave it
And it
out.
could be in the form of actually building, but
Yeah.
that's going to be for the really big players.
So why don't we just leave that out? It's chaos.
Probably better.
I'll deal with John.
Tell them to call me.
The next paragraph about tenant protections, my colleague asked to add that we urge the addition of policies and funding for emergency measures to address houselessness and homelessness.
Houselessness.
What's yeah.
RVs.
Oh.
RVs.
What is it?
RVs.
Oh,
Is the houseless.
Is that an understood term?
yeah, I don't think so.
Are people going to go, what's that supposed
It's
to be?
probably not. I mean, she might be trying to capture other tent cities and
Or
whatnot,
like
right?
couch surfing maybe?
Yeah.
Well, is it
Yeah.
enough to think of an RV as a home or not? Or do you explicitly want to add a term that says, people who are having to live in mobile, temporary, I don't know.
I mean, but the ultimate goal though, right, is to, if you're living in an RV, the goal is to get them into a home.
Mhm.
Yes.
So I guess it goes back to, do we have to distinguish between the two?
I don't think so,
Okay.
but
Houselessness is too.
I guess I thought of it as all homelessness.
Yeah.
Right, I do too.
I'll just take that out. I'll just say, is that okay though to keep the emergency measures?
I think if you really wanted to acknowledge that we have people in bizarre housing, you could talk about, we have a lot of folks who have set up tents or are in temporary shelters or in RVs parked up and down our streets, and they need places to live.
And I guess it gets into this, it's not just all about production, right? Because there are steps in between to get us there. Even if we were to produce 35,000 units, it'll take a while.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do in the meantime?
What I said, the 3 P's, I forgot. Preservation.
Production, preservation, protection.
Protection. So
We need to
this would
protect.
probably fall under
Yeah.
protection. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, 2 paragraphs after that, this ties into now the Cupertino comments. So my colleague suggested this is about new impacts to housing, new housing to schools. She added, we also call for additional adequate funding for the new schools, parks, and transportation infrastructure needed as we grow. And then if you go down to the next.
I think you could just merge these two, right? You could
Yeah.
just say, we recognize and address the impacts with additional funding of new housing. I mean, those 2 sentences could get merged by a good writer or something. They're kind of saying the same
I do think this so that increased housing will not degrade the quality of life of our residents. That does kind of sound NIMBYism though.
I agree.
So we have to strike that.
I agree. Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think we just say the impacts of new housing.
How about
To address the impacts of, a new development, including housing.
Yeah, we just can cut all that out
yeah.
Right.
and just end it at transportation infrastructure.
I do think, talking about the SB 50, one size fits all funding across the state
Yeah.
for schools
Yeah.
is pretty stupid. It's number one, it's a very low level, and it's not adjusted based on where you are, right? So if you're in the middle of Central Valley, you're getting the same SB 50 funds, as I understand it, as here in Silicon Valley, where the cost of everything is so higher, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, could you ensure that our schools are, as we're building new housing, our schools are covered?
You can't. It is this is the weak link in the housing push.
Okay, well, maybe we ought to talk about it then.
If you
Address
want to
it
hit
head
the
on.
legislature head on with a community issue, this is one they have full control over.
Yes,
And that was the hard, as we were creating new communities in industrial areas,
right.
trying to figure out that location for the new school site required lots of negotiation and lots of wrangling outside of the SB 50 arena. And it requires, and now those tools aren't available to cities anymore that allow that to happen.
Because
years
we're
ago.
excluded from considering school
Right.
impact, right?
Well, you can't. So you have to use redevelopment, you have to use other impact
Right.
fees as leverage.
So, I've heard stories of people in red states and places in Texas that are not Austin, where developers come in, they build a whole new subdivision in, the outskirts of Dallas or whatever. And they build school along with the housing. So there's actually, right, it's sort of like inclusionary schooling or something. But here, right, all we do is collect this pittance, and we put our schools at a bigger deficit. So it seems to me
There's
like
ways to do it. I mean, we did it in Milpitas. We have the schools now open around all those homes
Okay.
in our station. So there's ways to do it. But the legislature took
Under-
the tool away.
Yeah.
So you mean you did it before this bill?
I did it before redevelopment.
Okay. So I
We
think maybe
carved out the school site. It was a high-tech building, tilt-up construction.
I think it would
We
be
didn't have a
honest
school.
to acknowledge in this statement that a lot of the angst we have about a new housing, right, comes down to school impact and the fact that we have no tools to deal with it as a city.
We built communities.
We build whole communities, right?
Exactly. Whole communities.
And education matters, and we know it's a priority for all of us in the state. And so could we talk about making our schools whole as we build new housing and jobs?
And the tools to build the schools are not there.
Yes.
So,
We're in violent
to
agreement.
combine this, so,
Well, you could break out schooling and talk about SB 50 and say, look, the legislature well over a decade ago precluded our ability to
help build complete communities.
build. Yeah.
I just said, furthermore, barriers to adequate school and park funding should be removed. For example, state mandate limits on school impact fees assessed on commercial market rate residential development projects should be removed.
Should be removed, or we should say, or should be, just say, yeah. Actually, just
We
simplify.
build
Should be
cities,
right there.
our cities build complete communities. We believe in education. We believe that our schools ought to be fully funded with impacts of growth. And thanks to SB 50 in 2001 or whatever it was, we're precluded from.
You might want to take out SB 50 only because
Yeah.
today's
It's confusing.
it is
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah.
So I just
That meant something
wanted to-
years ago, but
Yeah.
not
I
today.
was gonna
Today's is
Fine.
something.
Okay.
and just,
But it's the legislation's still there. Because you're not even allowed under CEQA. You can't even consider impacts.
So
So,
the impact fees now, we have to always do nexus studies.
mhm.
But even, we can do all the nexus studies in the world, but we can't do anything about schools.
Impact fees should cover the cost. Do we want to get into this? Impact fees
I think,
should cover the cost of land and construction needed for school districts.
see,
I like his language.
yeah, I'd rather keep
Cities
it
build
as
whole
just short, and then
communities.
when they want to talk about things further, we have more information.
Cities build whole and complete communities.
But cities should be given the tools to build complete communities.
Good job.
Does
And
that make
then I'm sure the city manager will
Yes.
pare it down and make it very concise. And,
Well, I would add including full funding for school impact, right?
Well,
When we grow,
look
I mean,
at the-
it's in there.
I put,
is.
furthermore, barriers to adequate school and park funding should be removed. For example, state mandated limits on school impact fees assessed on commercial and market rate residential development projects should be lifted. Cities should be given the tools to build complete communities.
It captures the
Yeah.
essence of what we discussed. And so I think it's good for now,
Okay.
with the expectation that it's going to be
Rewritten.
paired and simplified as much as possible.
Okay, great. Commercial linkage
I feel
fees,
sorry
you
for
want
the
to?
city manager.
I know. I don't know if he knows. Oh, he doesn't know it's coming.
It's
I
probably
just
best
said,
that
hey,
way.
can you help me this morning? He's
We were like an hour and a half into this 2-hour CASA discussion from midnight to 2 a.m. And I turned and looked at staff and I said, so I'm the representative here, but I would really appreciate if we had professional staff, organize and write up these comments so that, it's well done. So, you remember that? And they looked at me like this, and then about 5 minutes later, I asked again, and they acknowledged they would.
They would do that.
Yeah.
It helps. Dan was there from the beginning when we gave you all the first draft. Dan
Oh,
was part
yes.
of that. So
Okay.
Yeah.
it's not completely foreign to him.
That's good.
He
Excellent.
doesn't know it, Cupertino.
I don't know if you've seen the latest
version.
Moana.
So now going on to transportation, Cupertino. I don't mind Cupertino's paragraph.
What did we say?
Strengthen and expand public transportation. Public transportation should link jobs-rich areas to areas. Well, so this is the big difference in your mayor's letter. He wanted to change everything to not just housing, but affordable housing, because he thinks we're fine with market rate housing.
He thinks we have enough of it, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I mean,
We don't, so I
no,
think
of course
we're
we
gonna lose
don't.
that.
Well, see, it's challenging though, because like Mountain we have exceeded our arena numbers 2 cycles.
Yeah.
But we can't get to the low income because
you
we
don't have money.
funding.
Yeah.
So
You
I
need
don't,
the
like,
market
from
rate.
our perspective, we don't have a deficit
Yeah.
and we're hitting our numbers, right? So
Well,
there's some truth to this.
The
and-
deal is, let's be honest. Neither one of our cities have taken enough RENA, right? The RENA allocations that have been given to us, frankly, don't represent the growth in the jobs in our cities. And so, honestly, we ought to be building more market rate housing too. My
But see,
city
that's
sure should.
kind of-
Do you think?
We
It's just,
are though. And this
No,
is like
I understand,
what's, you
but-
know,
but our RENA allocation, they asked us to produce 1,064 units over the 8-year cycle. How does that compare to Apple Park?
Right.
It doesn't.
Which is what the fundamental.
And they knew it was happening when they gave us the number, right? So basically, they think it's okay for us to be out of balance in our city. And my answer is, well, we ought to be building a lot more of all kinds of housing.
But going back to your mayor, I think we can't. They have data that shows that we need more market rate housing too. So
Yes,
I
of
think
course.
we strike it. I'm trying to.
I have no comment.
Yeah, honestly, like other than that
I will recuse myself on this question.
The only,
But yes.
the only points in the Cupertino comment that's different, I'd say, is the expanded regional transit network, and then affordable housing instead of just housing. I think we could strike that, and then we add the regional transit network.
Because that gets to what it's going to.
Yes.
Yeah.
There would be a copy of the original that you guys came out of the.
We can find it.
Can you find that? Because I remember there's some language in that relative to this that I thought was very good.
Is that the one that we were trying to channel?
Where we were trying to.
We were
check
trying,
on
exactly.
I fought,
But-
by the way, I fought as hard as I can for every point in my city statement, didn't I?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just,
The other piece on transportation my colleague added was transportation funds should be increased across the board and not tied to housing production only. So that's the whole carrot and the stick
Yeah.
thing.
I
Put it somewhere.
there would be a fair point to make in saying, look, you know, we know, I mean, this is what Stefan Heck told us at Joint Venture Silicon Valley when he was a keynoter a couple of years ago, and I've seen the statistics over and over again, right? If you have weak linkage in transportation, such that you don't have very dense housing, you have denser job centers typically, effective transportation must connect to those high density job centers. Otherwise you have a very ineffective transportation network, right? Mm-hmm. So when you have a light rail line from Campbell to downtown San Jose, it's all really interesting. But if you only have 35,000 jobs in downtown San Jose, is it any wonder that that line is not productive, right? Whereas in Mountain View, right, just in that little part around Moffett Field, you have 45,000 jobs, and they have almost no service.
And we have no chance.
Right.
So I mean, I think there's I would vote for more than a sentence on transit and sort of acknowledge that, the truth is we've built out a transit network that is ineffective, and we have to be also thinking about the fact that if we're going to make the region work, we've got to build transit to existing job centers. Right? It's not just about where we're going to place new housing. And if it ain't working for commuters, it's just not going to work.
So if you're okay with the not tying it to housing production only, then I'll just try to find a place to put that in our transportation paragraph that talks about significant increases in effectiveness.
So we have a point on transportation too when we organize it.
Yes.
So it sounds like we have revenue, reforms, and transportation. Okay.
And then, so this is where we get to the meat of Cupertino's comments. The next item, balance the jobs to housing ratio across the region.
I think everybody could probably agree on that, right?
The
and the question is how you do that.
I know, and who's responsible for doing that?
Pass state legislation that would limit or prohibit new office or commercial developments in areas where there is an existing imbalance in job to housing ratio exceeding a certain threshold.
Unless those, no, okay, so here's my concern with this. In this letter, we're saying, no, we don't like state control, and then yet here we're asking them to take care of this problem. I feel uncomfortable with that. Like, shouldn't each municipality decide for themselves what their maximum of office and commercial development should be?
Well, so if you go to the next paragraph, which was what my colleague suggested, and she, I think, she's from so I thought this was kind of captures Cupertino's, but also, and I thought it was broader and better, more, I thought it was better said. We urge attention to the jobs housing balance, not just in terms of building housing near jobs in California, but also in terms of policies to support location of jobs and community benefits in job poor communities.
It's really hard. It's hard to go tell a business that they can't come to Mountain View or Sunnyvale.
Yeah, so I don't think it's, so she's not saying limit,
but she's
say
providing
no.
incentives
Yes.
to go elsewhere.
Yes.
So it's like these opportunity zones that the federal government just created.
Okay, so would you be in favor of effectively taxing your residents to for businesses to move to downtown San Jose?
I think what this is saying, if you're,
You would?
yeah, I think what this is saying though is we're not going to remove our businesses. We're just going to start looking at limits so that the jobs housing ratio in the future is better balanced. That's how I interpret this.
I mean, I think about it often. I was in Clovis last weekend, and I think
You were where?
Clovis near Fresno.
Why?
I had a volleyball tournament was for my daughter.
Okay.
And I thought, well, I thought if we had high-speed running, good transit, you could commute to San Jose in 45 minutes. So that opens up the Central Valley now for housing, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But also, they only have agriculture right now, really, right? But there's a university there. Like, why not encourage tech to?
Wasn't that Rocana's
expanding
whole
out there?
point? Is like, we should be sharing the wealth.
And nationally, there's that, right? Why did the election turn the way it is? Because it's so imbalanced nationally.
I hear you.
It's not a bad thing, I think, to encourage job development.
I'm just thinking in our region, right, naturally what it would mean is we're giving dollars to San Jose to encourage business to go there instead of to our cities. That's all.
What would Chappie say to that?
Oh, he'd be
He
thrilled.
would love it.
But would you have
Sure.
wanted this Google to come to Cupertino?
Yes.
Really?
Really?
Yes.
To add even more
Yeah,
traffic?
Yes.
Really?
Wow, I wouldn't.
Yeah, see, and we're struggling to even, fit them into what we have.
I hear you. Part of it is like I'd like a rival to Apple that was more generous. Right?
Sure.
But it's also that, I still believe in the idea that cities that have jobs, we get a lot of revenue to run things for Apple.
Absolutely.
And if you get enough of a mass of it, you can actually get the transportation handled. I'm obviously not representing my council here in any way.
Yeah.
With
But
that
then
comment,
do you necessarily want the state to decide through legislation how that should happen? I mean, that's what that is asking for. It recommends passing state legislation that would limit or prohibit new. It seems like if we're arguing we want local control.
yeah, I know.
then we're
I get
saying,
I get the challenge, right? I get the challenge, and so I can't. I will let my council statement stand without my.
Yeah. And don't feel like you're all alone next week in defending what.
So do you want me to strike it all, or should I keep
I abstain.
one of these?
I definitely don't agree with the new asking for new state legislation.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That one.
Anytime legislation comes in place that affects the commercial market
Yeah.
system, it just screws everything up. It puts arbitrary barriers in place, and it just it creates more problems than it solves. So I don't like any of this stuff that's in here.
Okay.
But
Well, strike it all, and then we may have a
Yeah.
debate
Yeah.
that on Thursday night about it, and that's fine.
Talking about the
Take it
jobs housing balance, we could all agree that a big objective of this everybody's housing push is to get a better balance, right? So it's not it's a question of then what you do about it. Do you build a lot more housing, or do you limit jobs? And so it's clear that my council favors the latter.
But then why doesn't your council then pass your own legislation limiting your own jobs?
Yeah, that's true. You could put a cap.
Why do you need the state to do it?
Well, we effectively have. We have caps on office space.
Oh, you do.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Didn't one of you mention something about trying to change the job housing so that it wasn't just tied to your city, that it was more of a...
That's me. I've been saying for 10 years.
Yeah.
It should be.
That's going to be a key component of the subdivision discussion.
Yeah.
It should be by like a radius around job centers.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, frankly, our neighbors should not have to pay. But frankly, the executives live in Los Altos Hills, and Palo
what's
Alto.
most random? They all.
So what do you, I'm sorry, I'm missing your point. What do you think?
So I would like, instead of doing by city, we have the job centers mapped out and then draw radii around them, and that would be, and so whatever city falls in that radii would be responsible for the number of housing units that need to be produced. So let's say like for Google.
So it'd be a lot bigger than Mountain View. It'd include
Los Altos,
parts of
parts
Cupertino.
Could be, yes. Sunnyvale.
Yeah.
The only problem with that is if the jobs are in a particular city, it's putting a burden on, if you call it that, a
Yeah.
burden on the adjacent cities
Right.
for the housing production associated with it, but yet those other cities didn't have a say in whether that job creation, development, whatever it was, would take place or not, right? And so it burdens other cities based on decisions of a
Like
Yes,
Saratoga.
but I guess I would argue that, frankly, just being real and blunt, most of the executives who live, Google execs, whoever, they live in the hills. And they're the ones creating all these jobs and hiring all these people. So why do they get to live on 5-acre plots of land and we have to squeeze 100 people, 100 units per acre because of the jobs or the employees they're hiring? And we've, even seen in offices where they used to have 200 square feet per person or 300, and now we're down to 150. So they've managed to squeeze more people into those office spaces, and those are decisions that they're making. And
That we have no control over, right?
Yes, and they're not feeling the effects of it because they still get to live in the hills.
But I
And
think,
I don't think that's fair, to be honest.
I mean,
just don't
what?
think
But
that's fair.
I understand that. But I mean, it's going to be hard to have a discussion about changing the zoning in Saratoga or Los Altos Hills to do what you'd like, right? Which might be to improve the density a lot. And and it seems like if you're going to go after that, the only way you do it is to go after office space. I mean, I don't know.
Sure, I mean, if, the other cities wanted to build more office, I think that's fine. Frankly, I would argue that we probably could use more office, and, we've had to cap it, so if the other cities wanted to build more office, that might not be a bad thing, to be frank,
Yeah,
right?
no, I understand.
But I think there needs to be more of a shared, region, and this is the regional approach we keep talking about, but
It'll
if
be
you're going to
interesting
say, my city shouldn't be burdened from the jobs in Mountain View, we're never going to get there because, my argument is, well, frankly, the folks that work in Mountain View live, and some choose to live in Los Altos, and it's just over the fence, right?
Yeah.
So why shouldn't they have to
But that's
participate?
Absolutely, and I think that's where in the previous discussion where we talked about how the RENA subregion is in place to address those issues and those challenges, and for us to work together in order to find solutions to this stuff. But to put it in a document like this that stipulates, that we want state legislation in order to burden other cities and such in this way is probably not the best approach.
Yeah, so I don't think we have it in here. It was more about the incentivizing job creation and job support areas. So do we want to keep that or not?
So it's this last one. So it says, we urge attention to the jobs housing balance, not just in terms of building housing near jobs in California, but also in terms of policies to support location of jobs and community benefits in job poor communities.
Wow. It's a complicated sentence. So that really talks to what we were just discussing.
I think we had a segue.
Policies to support location of jobs and community benefits in jobs poor communities.
So you're right. It'd be like San Jose, encouraging.
I struggle with that
business to go to
sentence.
San Jose. We're at a place where I think a lot of us in Mountain View say that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't know how other cities feel. I think Palo Alto is probably the same.
Yeah.
Well, let's try to wrap this up as best we can. At least get to the point where you've got something that is, worthy of giving to your city manager, where he can, I assume it's a he, that can, put it into as concise a piece as possible. I really like, the original document from the standpoint that it is very clear and pointed on each of the key areas of CASA.
Sure.
And I feel as though we've kind of gone off on other tangent pieces that, while they reflect the interests of the cities, it may not address the specific challenge that we have relative to the CASA piece and the specific pieces of legislation that we anticipate as a result.
And the reality is we only heard from 3 cities, so we if we stuck to the original or second draft, maybe tweaked it a little bit,
Right.
then
Yeah.
I think we could get most support.
Yeah.
And I don't expect 15 cities to all say yes.
Right.
And this doesn't preclude any city from writing their own letter. If
Right.
your mayor
Yeah.
Rod wants to send his letter, I
I
think
think we
that's
need to stress
fine.
that.
Yes,
Mhm.
this is just a baseline. I think of things that we can most all of us can agree on,
Mhm.
and to start the conversation.
Right.
And I do think time is of the essence at this
Right.
point, so
Right.
we should try to get something out. But the more detailed items, I would just recommend any city that wants
Yeah.
to go
So-
on their own.
Would it make sense then to ask your city manager to use this as the framework
The
and
first
to incorporate,
Yes,
the
I think
key
so.
the key elements associated with these?
I think so. I
Okay.
think that's yes.
Well, one thing that I would speak up for in terms of our letter is some of this informational stuff, and particularly the second point here. It's not very well written in my view, but the idea here is, we're all being measured in terms of whether permits are pulled on housing projects. Another way to measure us, right, is in terms of what local government is doing in terms of our carrots and sticks. The thing we have control over is not when building permits are pulled, but it's when those entitlements are granted, right? Entitlements that developers asked for. So we think it would be worth making the point here and it's not made very clearly here because it's all sort of negative as opposed to, but I think the idea of, measuring us on entitlements as well as permits, right, would be a responsible thing to do.
Entitlements for projects that are presented to cities.
Yes.
Right? Absolutely.
Developer comes in, says, can I get this entitlement? Goes through the process. We say yes.
Right.
Okay. We ought to, certainly permits pulled is another metric. Actually finished construction could be another metric.
Yeah.
But to measure us as cities only on permits pulled really isn't fair.
Well,
But
we
again,
do. All those are measured.
Yeah.
Every year, we're all gearing up to making our next report to HCD. Applications submitted, entitlements given, permits pulled, occupancies closed.
But the focus of state legislation is only on the permits pulled, right?
Well, SB 35 did, or one of the legislations that passed. in housing
SB 35 was only on
There-
permits pulled.
There is on permits pulled, but it also put in a reporting mechanism to HCD
Okay.
that will then allow the legislature to use these other metrics.
Okay.
Um,
So do you think we've already got this covered?
I think that all of that data is currently being sent to the state.
Yeah.
Fine. So
I
maybe
think-
it's not it's not a question of data, but it's that maybe the statement is as we come up with new carrots and sticks for cities, cities ought to be measured on what they have control over, which is
Right. Exactly.
I think that's a
Yeah,
good
yeah.
point.
Which is
And then we just
entitlements.
need to do
Right.
better messaging of like, this is what we control, this is what we do.
Right.
I know you're gonna finesse it, but for me, my most important thing for our city is just don't take our money.
Yeah.
I think that's universal for all of us.
And I
We need it for
I wanna keep it
infrastructure.
short because I worry if it's 4 pages, it
Yeah,
gets
yeah.
lost.
Exactly. That's why I like the succinctness of this one here. And I really like how it's got this section at the end in terms of what we have accomplished as the 15 cities of the county.
Careful part of the don't take our money is the small cities. In the financial model that we got back, the big cities within the county would get the money.
So we've already seen this data. That's what I suspected. But
We put together what we thought CASA said,
yeah.
and then we got feedback from MTC staff, and they gave us back a revised model
Okay.
that is still very unclear, which is why when you read it, it's not consistent with CASA necessarily. But they clarified one very important point, and that is the money would be redistributed to those cities that are doing the housing
Yeah, of course.
within the county.
Yeah.
Duh.
And so, which is why I'm looking over.
Yeah.
Do we get many of them?
Exactly. So that's why I'm looking at Rico. say
Yeah.
it is going to be those cities that do not have, well, Saratoga hasn't denied a housing project for 10 or 15 years, but we will be the ones to give up our property tax to, the Mountain Views and the San Jose's and the Sunnyvales and the Cupertinos, because that's where the housing's happening.
Cupertino, we'll see.
Okay.
Huh, interesting. So this is the modeling
There's a
that's
bubble
part of
being
this
built over
element
Cupertino
9.
right now.
This is the element 9
Yeah.
tax increment
Interesting.
financing model. That's the
And
20%
who
model.
would be ultimately responsible for figuring out this modeling, this enterprise that's an
Exactly.
element
The enterprise itself.
that we all hate?
The one that just got introduced,
Yeah.
yesterday?
Ugh.
Exactly.
Okay.
And, we said we want ABAG to do it, so I think that's.
Yeah, so the intent is still the same, but we have to be careful with how we word the language,
Yes.
because if we say, we don't want our,
This is
our
a divide and
revenue
conquer.
to be taken
Yeah.
away.
This
from
is a
us
divide and
cities.
conquer.
It is. It sounds like it.
And we're going to get outvoted pretty quickly.
Right, yeah.
Oh,
By-
you're so
by who-
smart.
By who?
By this bigger
By
city.
by
the
the
cities
bigger
who are gonna
agents.
benefit
Yeah.
from the funding.
Absolutely.
Margaret's gonna be like, take their damn money.
Where do I write the check?
She's like, never mind about this, right?
But I don't think we're gonna get as much money as we say that, like
Yeah,
San Jose.
San Jose's gonna get a big
Most
check.
of it,
Yes.
and we're still not gonna get what we can.
Yeah.
You will be definitely a receiver.
You'll certainly get more money than we
Do
would.
you think I'd be a receiver too?
We'll be in the negative.
Well,
If you're
where
building.
Cupertino Falls
Yeah.
space is going to be a lot different than the Los Gatos
Yeah.
and the Saratoga.
Water.
They paid for them.
That should-
It is a percent of our, whatever money we collect. You're a no-low city like we are, right? We did the TEA together?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
our tax increment, this is the tax increment based on, AV growth.
Yeah.
Our AV growth is huge, even though we don't have
AV means,
assessed valuation.
okay.
So our assessed valuation within our community,
It's huge
within our
because you're
communities,
having turnover.
because we have longstanding residents who've been in our homes for 30 plus years. And then when they sell their home, we see huge increases in assessed valuation.
By a
Because of-
factor of 10 perhaps.
Exactly, it's huge. And so that is what keeps
And that's
Communities
part
like
of what
Saratoga.
they would take in CASA?
that is up for grabs. They say they wouldn't. I don't necessarily trust them.
No,
They say it would only be on new building growth,
right.
but it would require a whole team of accountants
To figure out
to figure which is why I don't trust that statement.
Yeah, that would be too.
Yeah,
And you normally in a tax increment arena, you look at just total AV growth, assessed valuation growth, not just that on new development.
right. So if you went to the assessor right now, he has no filter for discriminating.
No, he could just because he looks at he's going to look at building permits. Is it possible to extract the data? Yes. Do I trust it will be done in an equitable way? No.
The last
Okay.
point I wanted to,
But we all agreed to be in the sub-region.
And we will.
Oh,
It'll be a
yeah.
very healthy
is from-
conversation.
from Mountain View, this one last point we
You
wanted
need
to add is that we urge acceptance to housing mandates for cities that have met their housing goals as an incentive to continue to do so with local planning control. That's wordy, but the idea is some of us who are doing the housing, we'd like to maintain local control if you're gonna take it away, because we just wanna make sure that
Could we?
those of us doing the work, doing the good job.
I think that's
gets
fair.
Yeah.
fair credit for it.
You know, the other thing though is none of us, if you count BMR, none of us have met our mandates, right?
Yeah, but that's just because we don't have
We
the
don't
funds.
meet
Well,
mandates.
but that's my point. People will say, "Oh, sure, when you meet your mandate, haha," and then they'll screw it up, put the screws down on you anyway. Is it fair to say, make some assertion about? I mean, if you structure it the way I had suggested in the email a couple days ago, talking about, up front, here's what we've done to produce housing, and then up in that section, we acknowledge the issue of affordable housing. I mean, Cupertino this year, we floated our big pot of money out there, and nobody took it. We had not one bid. And then I started trying to figure out why this is, and it's like, well, It was $6 million. Sounds like a lot of money, right? It ain't worth nobody's time. Our land is too expensive. It would have had to been 16 or 26 or 36 or $60 million in order to get anybody's attention, right? And so a big problem is CDBG grants have gone down, and as redevelopment funds no longer available, combination of a whole bunch of things means we just don't have enough money to make this affordable housing happen.
Every city in this county has met its mandate.
Exactly.
Every city.
Which mandate?
The mandate
Housing
to zone
exactly.
Yes.
for housing.
So we ought to say that.
And we will.
I
That
think we
was,
say that.
It's right up front.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That we have fulfilled, and that's the message, that's the war on words that we're losing as cities.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Is
right.
we have met our mandates.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. $6
So
million
you ought to
doesn't
say,
matter.
but we ought to say what we mean by that, because people will dismiss that too, right? Meaning we've allocated our arena. Some of us have actually, for this current cycle, even entitled all of our units. But what we haven't been able to do, and what we have no prospect of doing, given current funding, is to get the low and very low covered, right? And we probably ought to just acknowledge that that's.
Isn't that the statement, but it was removed, all 15 cities have state-approved plan? Well, that's different.
No, that a
Is
state-approved plan means
It
we have
means-
met our mandate.
Except for Los Angeles.
No, they have, they
Okay.
have, but the
Okay.
state keeps reporting they haven't, and they're fighting
Oh,
about it.
really?
But they
Oh.
have in
Well,
writing.
let's assert that we
Okay.
have.
But the other thing that we did is we looked at all of the units that have been, well, this is permits again, okay, all the units that have been permitted in the county. We, as a county, are on track to hitting our county numbers. So again, that was the attempt to kind of to get control of the headlines a little bit, which is, look, all of us put together, we're doing a phenomenal job. We're meeting our mandates. The home builders are building homes in our county to be able to reach these housing goals set by the state. So
We've been responsible players in the system,
very responsible.
right? I think we have to say that.
That are in the other document, right?
Yes.
All 50
And
cities have
if we
the
don't like it
state-approved plans,
because we should have been building more,
It was removed,
You know,
and we'll put it back
But
in.
we don't build.
permits for
We-
24,000.
yes, and furthermore, right? Yes, maybe we have to take, given the jobs growth now, we're going to have to take bigger allocations when we do this.
And that we don't have enough time to go into that, but I would argue that all of our general plans, when we did our housing elements, had our job projections in our housing element. So I think it is a bit of a straw man also to hit us over the head. I'll look over to Mountain View, that when Mountain View did its housing element, I bet a lot of that growth was already envisioned in the general plan.
Yeah.
You know?
Sure.
And so why beat up on the growth producing areas when that housing balance and that was all, now, it's like a cash flow, right? That's the budget.
Yes.
But the cash flow is a bit distorted,
Right.
right? But when you're being banged on the head for the current moment versus the long-term plan,
I think your points are excellent.
I think we're being taken advantage of
I agree.
in the media, by the legislature, in my opinion.
I agree.
That's why I like the original version of these things so much, because it speaks to
Okay.
each of those things very, very clearly without muddling it up with all this other stuff. And that's where I'm not saying we go right back to this thing. I think some of the tweaks that we've identified are very worthwhile, and we can try to factor them in. But I think the message gets lost if we get into something that's
You got the good stuff.
beyond this. So.
I think that's great approach. So we'll go back to more.
So maybe we go back to
Maybe
zero, the
reorganize.
city manager's statement, and then we try to get a city manager to try to incorporate all the crap that we've added, not very effectively yet. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's fair to say, it's not fair to ask.
Yeah.
Why?
It's fair to say.
Well, because
It's a job of the professionals is to take our input into
It's a
their.
job of professionals to hear from his city council.
Yeah.
No, I
Just
understand.
send it to me.
Really?
Yeah, just set it.
I'll help you.
I'll try to take
You'll
this
figure it out.
I'll figure it
You'll
out.
get
It's
it
my
done.
job, right?
You
Usually
have a
by
few friends.
When do we need to post this by?
Well,
Monday?
if
Put out
it's not
Monday.
ready, it can be added to the packet later.
Yeah.
The
We'll
agenda,
certainly- we
the
have it
agenda,
on the agenda. so
it's on the agenda.
Okay.
The agenda will be posted, and if we'll get it done when we get it done.
Yeah.
But I'll do my best.
You don't have to
What?
tell us
Were you
which city
volunteering to
manager.
take the original name that came out of the group to merge it with what's come out of the
Well, I'm gonna
Black?
take this one, and then I'm gonna
Protect the
compare it to the original one, and then
Okay, that's a lot of work.
Yes,
Which,
a lot of work.
to get to done before Thursday.
Yeah.
So I will help you then.
thank you.
I just
Excellent.
realized that yeah,
Thank you.
Well, we have to figure it out, right? I mean,
before Thursday.
yeah.
No.
Okay.
I
And
mean,
I'll
there's
try
not.
to work on something tomorrow, or try to clean this up.
Okay.
What else we got for today?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a big one, so I'm glad we took the extra time to cover it. All right, so that takes care of that piece. Legislative guiding principles.
I just have
At
a feeling
least.
we're not gonna get to it if we have this on.
Yeah.
I think this
Okay.
is gonna take
Okay,
us.
so
All right.
At least.
that one
And
from
we,
this
I mean,
agenda.
the guiding principles are already adopted,
Right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
so we'll just leave it as is, and, okay,
We'll strike it from the agenda at this time.
okay.
If they're already
Okay.
adopted, why are we looking at it? Just
To
to
see if you want any tweaks to it, and,
So-
but I mean, like, there isn't a housing, so we're creating a housing one now, so.
You know, at least there's no written statement from the city of Cupertino that says we don't have a housing crisis. I'm feeling very good about that.
That's true.
So we didn't, Manny, we did not do the,
Yeah, we haven't done the consent calendar.
right,
And we also haven't done your review.
and we also haven't done the committee assignments,
Correct,
okay,
correct. But we have done the housing policy statement
yes.
in item 2, okay? So let's go to item, the approval of the agenda, a consent calendar and so forth.
Okay.
Do we have a motion?
A motion to approve.
Okay, got a motion, a second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're there. On the old business, discussion assignment of board directors to committees. We gave that then a heads up last go around, right, in terms of this was going to come and they
Thank you
should
for
come
taking that on.
prepared for this next meeting with a list of who they
Yes.
wanted to. Did you get any
Important.
feedback from anybody? Anyone
So I
following
have,
up?
it's on your, if you turn it, I did not receive a lot of feedback from a lot of people.
Uh-huh.
But so Rena, I think is, we need to get moving on that, but, I made some staff additions to this list, and I want to make sure that this is okay with you. On the staff front, Laurel and Leslie are both willing to participate with that as well. Rania is working for Chappie now, so since Chappie will be on the committee, Rania will be involved.
So you just assigned her. That's good.
So it's, Jared Ferguson may also want to stay involved, and Jared moved from Chappie's office to Mayor Licardo's office,
Okay.
and I think that would be very beneficial for us.
Okay.
Terry, the city manager from Montessorino, he is a planner by trade. He is also interested in participating in it. So I don't know if this is getting to be too many people, but he also participates with SCAPO. And SCAPO is starting to discuss this, and they have been given no direction
Okay.
to do so. So they would like to.
I think this is a good mix of
Okay.
individuals for that one. So.
So the other question was.
Now, if others want to join them, I think it can even handle more. This is a big,
Okay.
big effort.
I worry about too many chiefs, and anyway, I'm just here to work and do what you want me to do.
Well,
but
again,
Mark-
what are we asking of them? To come back to us and report to us from time to time? And I
Yes.
suspect that many of these folks are going to be on the sub-region as well.
Yes, we're trying just to figure out how it's gonna. We're now figuring out how it's gonna work, and we will have a timeline and.
But then we also have the consultant who is involved in that one, right? Or do we
Maybe.
not?
We have to decide how we're going
Okay.
to staff it, and there is. SCAPO discussed this earlier this week, and the county presented, and the county did not present what what we have planned at all. So they still envision this as a very large project, and our proposal was not to be a large project, to utilize our planning directors and housing staff already existing as a technical committee, and then utilizing our city managers and then having a committee of the 16 jurisdictions.
Right.
San Mateo County tells me that it's a very it is not an expensive process, but it is, we would probably need an additional, like a half planning staffer during this process to plan and organize and conduct the meetings.
Okay.
I mean, it's.
So this group
But
will
this group
define
will
all of that
yes,
stuff. But at some
yes.
point, we're gonna have where cities appoint a
Mhm,
representative to
That will be later.
RENA, and that's gonna come
Yes.
later, as such, right? But they're gonna be doing the groundwork in
Yes.
preparation for this.
When does the cycle begin? 2022?
2024?
20, yeah.
But there's we were currently ahead of the process a little bit, but it is, yeah, we've lost a little bit of ground, but we need to.
So numbers would typically come out in 2021 or 2022?
Come out about a year or so, and we want to be right ahead of that.
They come out in a year from now?
No, a year ahead.
Oh.
And everything's usually about a year or two.
But-
Yeah, right.
but
Okay,
there's
so
a time-
2022 maybe.
But there's a timeline that we have to, we have to submit all of our resolutions to for approval.
Right.
So, and that's like a year before that.
Okay, so I
so-
assume that Chappie is chair?
He said he is amiable to being chair.
Okay.
So
All right, good.
I did have a question here though,
Yeah.
because Margaret, you had also expressed interest of this as well, and you verbally did and didn't, so I
Yeah.
just wanted to let you guys all figure that out.
Yeah, I guess I started reading about the San Mateo Arena, and then we had a conversation about the county's involvement. I talked to Cindy Chavez a bit about it on Wednesday, got her take on it. So I thought, if I could be helpful in terms of just the people, the players, I would be happy to do it. But Lisa's
See it in the packet.
my mayor has also
It's all right, you can look with me.
expressed interest. So I didn't think you would want two from the same city. So
So we've had some,
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem necessarily. I mean, if we had 3 of you on there, then it may be a little difficult. But I don't think there's a problem from that standpoint, as long as you and Lisa have an idea as to how each of your roles are and such, and don't overlap each other. I think see it's a problem. Rod, do you think of a problem that could arise as a result of having 2 people from the same
Mountain
city?
View's board representative is you, right?
no, it's Lisa.
Oh, it
It's
is?
just exec board member. But should this continue to next year, I will be.
So as far as this committee assignment's concerned,
Yeah, it feels like there are too many people to my taste, but whatever,
I think it's good to start off with this number of people, because some will be able to attend and some won't. And
Who's Leslie Little and
Leslie
drop off.
is Morgan Hill, assistant
Staffer.
city staffer. These are staffers down here. So
Okay.
Leslie
Who's-
Little,
that's
Jared Ferguson was the former chief of staff for Chappie. So he has already, Jared, Leslie, and Laurel and I were the ones that staffed it previously. Jared is, if he would like to continue, I think it's a good idea because he can help.
no, I mean, whatever.
I think
the more professional staff, the better.
Yeah, right.
yeah, absolutely. So we've got 8 individuals currently in this committee.
I mean, it's frankly, it's also good to see some
So
people
that
that
gives us 8.
we don't normally engage, right?
Mhm.
Roland from Gilroy,
Yep.
don't know anything about him, glad to have him. Curtis,
mayor.
glad to have him.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
Curtis
Curtis is gone now.
Is he gonna be?
Oh,
Oh, but is he still?
He
Yeah,
actually.
is
No,
still
he
on the board?
resigned.
After they ousted him.
He
He
resigned.
resigned from the city council?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
So they're
So
gonna
I'm
have to
sorry,
call
I-
a special election.
No.
They can
Appoint someone.
appoint.
They told me they're just gonna appoint.
Oh, shit.
I know, right?
Really?
Wow. All right, so we're
It's
down
gonna
to
be
7.
messy.
And then
I could have done that too.
Anyway, okay, so
You wouldn't. You didn't. Hell no.
let's
No, he
add-
doesn't.
Let's add Margaret to that one, remove
Yeah.
Curtis from it, mark Chappie as the chair, and
then,
we'll go from there.
okay, and then are we ready to move to the CASA one? Are we just gonna make that the legislative committee?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
That's probably a good idea,
Yeah.
given a name I see on
So
there.
then that means you're chairing this one, is that?
Yep.
I guess
So you're stuck with that one for a
Yeah.
long time.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I just hope all these foods
All these what?
die. All these food things die.
okay.
Okay,
ADUs,
that's good.
Okay, so.
who
No,
wants to be the chair?
Rod, I assume you'll be chair? Or would you rather,
sure.
have
Rather
somebody
appoint Lydia? No, I'm happy to be.
else? Good.
Thanks, Rod.
You're most welcome.
How about the transportation piece?
I see Rod's name again.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be fair to, unless Rod, you want to chair that one as well. If not, maybe we can get somebody else to step up.
Who's Michelle Wu?
Mhm.
What do we know about her?
Yeah.
Southwest Hills.
I've seen her sometimes at some VTA thing.
She's been at the last two meetings.
Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
I don't know. I guess the question is, what are we gonna get done this year? It could be reactionary depending
Have you
on what
ever
sort of mega
had a
bills
committee, including VTA,
No.
to like actually try to move the needle? I guess that maybe doesn't work, huh?
let's not go down that road.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So why don't we let this one float as
Okay.
is for now, and then we'll identify the chair.
Okay,
I mean,
Right.
frankly,
And we have nobody on
as
fire
initiatives or regional things come along, right, it could be,
I'll do fire. I like fire.
You
I mean,
like
I like
fire?
suppression. You like fire.
I spent a lot of time learning the fire industry, so I can do fire.
you
And
might
I
be a
have lot
committee,
of-
you might be a
do?
committee of one.
Yeah.
Well, I know, I thought it came from someone.
It
Came
came
from Javed.
It came from
Javed.
Javed.
Because Rowena came up to me and said, "Can you be on the fire?" And I had no idea what she was talking about. I was like, sure. So I thought they were gonna be on here.
Oh, well, maybe,
Rowena is.
Well,
runs the
I
She's
city.
want-
now the new mayor.
Okay, yes.
Rowena's the
I
new mayor.
believe she's the
Mhm.
one who asked me to
She's
join.
She was the vice mayor.
Well, this is about wildfire or just
suppression.
Yeah.
they were worried about evacuation routes and also just fire suppression.
Yeah.
This one was one that came up from the board. I mean, not from
This-
us. We didn't come up with this one. This
I
was
think-
brought
One
up.
of your residents
No, I think
who's
it was
talked to
Javed.
you.
It was Javed.
Oh,
No, it's
okay.
Javed.
They
No,
said
no,
it's,
no, but
Well,
he
how
said,
about we put
Paul's come over and
Javed
talked to you,
on
Ron?
Oh,
What-
Hanson?
one of the issues our hillside dwellers are having, and I don't know how sympathetic you are, Flatlander, but one of the issues that's come up for, this guy I did. adventure guides
insurance.
with, Paul Hanson.
Yeah.
He says folks that are living in the hills are many of them are unable to get homeowners insurance anymore because of fire danger.
They can get it.
They can
It's
get it,
super
yeah.
expensive.
Coverage sucks and it's more expensive, much more expensive. But anyway, but he's got a valid concern, and
He does.
I know there are issues with Los Altos Hills and Cal Fire covers them.
Well, but-
not the locals, but there's issues with
So-
response times and all that too.
So what he's pushing, right, is technology that could be installed to give early warnings.
Yeah. So we had
A
a
whole
meeting
fiber
with-
optic network and
we had a
cameras
meeting
and
with
stuff.
County Fire, and he was there, and he participated in it and so forth. And he's got a early detection type of system with cameras and
Yeah.
whatnots. And
So the idea
hotspots and all
is,
that
you
stuff.
know, we could convince
And,
insurers that betting on their homes was a good risk.
Yeah,
We
but
went
don't
down
buy
the
it.
rabbit hole.
yeah.
Insurers won't bite on them.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
all right. So that take care of that one. Now let's go ahead and go into, I assume, not a closed session, but Andy, maybe if you vacate the premises.
Yep, I'm trying to turn
and we'll
this off.
Release the room, and then we can go ahead and do the review. and then we'll call you back in.
Will you?
You know, I gotta go to my car and get something for this.
You can
You want me to stay?